For one Owen period sketch by a mysterious someone who drew meticulously accurate images of human anatomy and only signed Chlorian, Josephine wrote, "Looks like Chase hand." Looks like Chase hand. Capital C. Much later, New Harmony's Linda Warham found Josephine's clue, tenaciously followed its trail, and proved beyond a reasonable doubt that Josephine's hunch was correct. Chlorian was the pseudonym used by the talented artist Martha Chase. She had come to town as the wife of the elderly Dr. Thomas G. Chase and later married Robert Owen's son, Richard Owen. Linda then published her evidence and several of Martha Chase's drawings in the Indiana Magazine of History. So Josephine's efforts live and live and live. In some ways, Arthur Bester said, research then is exactly what it is today and will always be the same. One must seriously search, certainly visit the places where the things happened, and try to possibly search out physical remains. This is a lot of fun. It's not an arduous task. I had a great deal of pleasure driving around the country trying to find an old building. His wife, Dorothy, remembered it differently. According to Dorothy, he, quote, walked our family off our feet, always wanting to walk another half mile to see an old church or warehouse. I feel certain that Martha Jansen can empathize with Dorothy Bester. She's sitting over here in her own clothing that she made herself from scratch. Martha is here tonight with her husband Don, the old man who's sitting next to her here. And Don Jansen, a Shaker scholar in the beginning, has now visited hundreds of communal sites. They've come in tonight from California. They used to be in Louisville. But Don's experiences parallel Bester's so much that I included Don's account in my introduction to Backwoods Utopias. And I want you to hear one quote that I used and to see one of his many posters. You can see more of them at the Center for Communal Studies and in the archives. Don Jansen said, "It is difficult for me to describe the personal satisfaction and wonderful memories that my travels have produced. I have been in small-town courthouses researching deed records, traveled back roads across the country, and met interesting people. I have been invited by communities to share meals with them and have spent winter nights in unheated rooms covered with blankets." Was that one in Bethel? He and I spent kind of a night like that one time. "I have no interest in the lights of Las Vegas or Times Square in New York. While these might be interesting places, for me they can't begin to compare to that small group of houses at the end of a dirt road and people devoted to experimenting with better ways to live." I think New Harmony probably appeared that way to some people, even though it was called that wonder of the West, but it certainly was out of the way when the Harmonists and the Owenites were here. When Arthur Bester joined the history faculty at the University of Illinois in 1947, he rejoiced that for the first time he had easy access to the unpublished Owenite materials at the WMI. In a letter to me accepting our invitation to speak at the WMI sesquicentennial in 1988, Dr. Bester wrote, "I can't think of any research expeditions of mine that were so gratifying as those that took me to New Harmony. My first trip to the Working Men's Institute revealed how great a wealth of unutilized manuscript material was there." He went on to explain that Backwoods Utopias had started out to be an expansion of his 1938 doctoral dissertation at Yale. He was writing that on Fourierist socialism in the United States. However, he found such an exhaustive collection on Owenism at the WMI that his book never reached the 1840s when Fourierism began its communal phase in America. His letter continued, "My work at New Harmony thus represented a real turning point in my scholarly life, and I owe so much to the Working Men's Institute that I am pleased as well as proud to be a speaker on its 150th anniversary." From the late 1940s to the early 1950s, Bester was a familiar figure in New Harmony. In his letter, he commented on his earlier experiences here. He wrote that his wife, quote, "was with me on almost every visit I made, and she kept house for the whole family during a month there, while I burrowed through the storage rooms of the Working Men's Institute, coming home black as a coal miner." Well, let me show evidence that the young Dr. Pitzer followed Bester's precedent and also found that research in the WMI collections is not always pretty. I could get down and dirty, and I was 75 years younger then. However, I have to tell you that it can get downright scary if somebody catches you in the act. I still have that camera, and I have a little note that goes with it that says up on the shelf, it says, "You have gone where I've gone and seen what I've seen." It retired before I did, actually. Every 2 or 3 weeks, Dr. Bester would appear on a mission from his university's Illinois Historical Survey to gather information on regional collections. He remembered being on a committee of 3 which came down to look at the records and make recommendations on how they should be preserved. From this initiative came a generous invitation for the WMI to lend its precious collections to, on Owenite materials is particularly what he's interested in, to the University of Illinois for microfilming and cataloging. My wife, who is from Carmi, has been considerably gratified to learn about Illinois' support of the WMI, and everyone who has used these historic resources from that day to this are in Bester's debt because he masterminded this invaluable service and performed much of the cataloging himself. Bester's perceptive historical analysis in Backwoods Utopias broke new ground by giving credibility to the importance of communal societies in American social and economic history. A lot of people just laughed at many of these communal societies in the early going, didn't take them seriously, wanted to poke fun. Oh, they were celibate, they were whatever, they were crazy. Arthur Bester always took them seriously, dead seriously. And not only that, he put his analytical mind to work upon them so that people would truly understand these people were serious. They were committed. They had many good ideas. They really contributed to the world, and they still are. Thousands of eco-villages and other communities. So he paved the way in these dimensions. He, therefore, also moved communal scholarship dramatically forward. His influence expanded the field in 3 fundamental directions. And I want to take a little time to talk about classification, terminology, and theory. Prior to Bester, classification of communal groups had been confined within the religious tradition, Catholic and Protestant, Eastern and Western. But Bester observed that the economic and organizational structure of communal living by religious sects, S-E-C-T-S, in America, especially the harmonists and Shakers, had been famously successful. So he speculated, might not communal organization offer, quote, a method for the social regeneration of mankind apart from any specific religious doctrines? To many social reformers in the early 19th century, he said, it seemed to do so. And he argued effectively that secular reformers like Robert Owen had come to believe that communalism was in fact a viable, voluntary, and nonviolent method to change the world. Thus, Owen and other utopians became secular communitarians. They thought that building models of their utopias would result in replication of such communities around the globe. Pictured here is the one that Robert Owen promised south of New Harmony, but never built. Bester, by his simple but insightful observation, had introduced a new classification of communal experimentation divided into sectarian and non-sectarian, religious and secular. With this new classification, he opened a new dimension of communal scholarship which future researchers could use and expand. Bester also worked wonders in clarifying the confusing terminology then inhibiting the field of communal studies and corrupting public perception. He adroitly abandoned the increasingly misleading and emotion-packed word communism when referring to the organizational structure of American communal societies. He replaced communism, which had been first used in 1840, with two other words coined in 1840, communitarian and communitarianism. Bester also went an important step farther by inventing the new term communitarian socialism. This helped solve a source of misunderstanding which had led many to link communal societies like Owen's at New Harmony to the revolutionary socialism proposed later by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Now, theory then has to be added to terminology and classification if you're going to reach an overarching understanding of any phenomenon, and communalism isn't any exception. So like the struggle of physicists to develop a unified theory, communal studies scholars are still wrestling to find a single theory that might explain the nature, endurance, recurrence, and significance of communal societies, and also the movements that found them. In 1972, Rosabeth Moss Kanter proposed a theory which became known as the success-failure approach. Her theoretical method was to judge the success of all communal groups by the yardstick of whether they lasted in community for at least a sociological generation of 25 years. I took exception with Kanter's success-failure approach because it labeled Owenite New Harmony, and by implication Owenism itself, a failure. Now, it's true that by 1827, after 2.5 years, Owen's semi-socialistic community collapsed. But Bester's interpretation was that, and listen closely to these words, Owen's practical project at New Harmony, Indiana, ended in disarray. Let me start again. Owen's practical project at New Harmony, Indiana, ended in disarray, but his propagandist mission to America did not.